So today I'm just going to share my story, but I figured I'll talk especially about the decision-making process that led me to decide to go to business school. And it really stems from this sort of outlook, mindset, if you will, that I kind of developed as sort of a survival mechanism as I was dealing with a lot of my symptoms that I'd experienced. Over the last few years, like all of you, in the last 8 years or so, I've had the steady decline in muscle function. I graduated from college with a still fully able, and it was right around that time in 2008 when I started to experience muscle weakness, which I continue to have today. So I'm especially going to talk about this notion of finding open doors. And what that means is, it's actually just something I came up with as I was creating the presentation, so it has no actual definition, but it's just this notion of really seeking out opportunities that no matter what your level of disability, you'll always be able to achieve them. And it's something that, something I've really been trying to focus more and more on as I'm losing additional ability. I'm trying to find opportunities. I'm trying to remember the dreams that I once had for myself before I had any muscle symptoms. And I really am trying to find the best way possible to achieve those goals despite my level of muscle function. And it's not really something where you ignore the obvious. Like we all know, we're all living every day. The fact that we're losing certain abilities, I call them just personal milestones of knowing what I used to be able to do the other day, I can no longer do now. And every day it's something new. Getting out of chairs in the last few months has become especially difficult for me. So there's always something that I'm losing the ability to do. So what I really try to do is to find a way to kind of push beyond that, to kind of force my mind into a future that at present may seem unreasonable, but I figure if I can think of a goal that's really stretching my mind, then I can kind of backtrack and find a way to achieve that. And just a disclaimer, this is something I fail at constantly. I'm definitely not an expert on this. But the way I see it is if I can do this more often than not, because I'm always going to have bad days. I mean, we're always going to have days where we're just not feeling great or something happens that's traumatic, like a fall, for example, and it just throws you out of whack and you're just not in a mood to be forward thinking at that moment. So I figure if you can do this more often than not, you'll be moving in the right direction, you'll be moving forward, and that's really the important thing to keep in mind. So just some quick background on my early life, just a 10,000-foot overview. I grew up in West Hartford, Connecticut. I graduated from high school in 2004 and from Northeastern University in Boston in 2008. In my diagnostic odyssey, after having spoken with many of you and reading about your stories on the Jain Foundation website, there's one area where I guess I feel lucky, if you will, is the fact that I was diagnosed before I had symptoms. I was actually in a car accident my senior year of high school where they just did a routine blood test as part of my admittance into the emergency room, and it came back that I had the CK levels in the tens of thousands, which I know many of you had the same type of thing. And they think, oh, you have some sort of liver disease or you've suffered a very bad internal injury. And of course, I felt fine outside of a few bumps and bruises, and it just really scared me. About a year later, they finally diagnosed me correctly with dysferlinopathy. They're doing a muscle biopsy in my thigh. But I'm actually fairly, again, lucky, if you will, that they correctly diagnosed me after the initial obvious, it appeared that it was a liver disease when it wasn't. But the next step was, okay, this might be muscle related. So just thinking about what a lot of you have had to go through where you're misdiagnosed for years and years, or you're diagnosed as something else, and they give you all sorts of drugs and steroids to combat that. I really feel for you guys, and I'm sorry that happened to you, because it's just not something that many doctors see. I mean, we're talking about today over lunch just how rare it is for people who are diagnosing with muscle diseases that even see dysferlinopathy. In MDA clinics, sometimes they see people once or twice a year. They don't really have a lot of information. So to get diagnosed correctly, I find to be I feel like I'm kind of an oddity in that regard. But I'm kind of happy that happened, because I don't think I would have handled it the same way had it not happened in that way. And it was really after I graduated from college in 2008, almost as if like a light switch turned on or turned off, when I started to feel symptoms. I went for a run after work at a park. I was still living in Boston at the time, and my legs got tired a lot earlier than normal, and I thought that was kind of weird. Again, I just figured I was out of shape. And then I would go to the gym and I'd do the same exercise that I had been doing for a few weeks, and same amount of weight, and it was getting harder and harder, and I was losing strength. And part of me wanted to say again I was just being lazy, but at the same time, I knew that was probably related to the muscle disease that I found out about a few years prior. And just to set the expectation, when I was diagnosed, even though they diagnosed me correctly, they still kind of didn't give me the proper timeline of expectation. They're like, that'll happen. You'll probably get symptoms in your 30s or 40s, and by then there'll most certainly be a cure, but just in case, just go see a doctor or something. So for 4 years, I'm like, okay, I know I have this. I'm missing some sort of protein or enzyme or something, and I'll just live life normally. So when I found out that I was actually starting to experience symptoms much earlier, that was pretty difficult to deal with. And then in about 2009, I decided to go see a neurologist. I went to Beth Israel Hospital in Boston, and I saw this doctor, again, somewhat familiar with it. He was a neurologist. He wasn't exactly the most encouraging person in the world, and I think a lot of us, we probably have a lot of doctors that we see that we have good relationships with, or if you don't have a good relationship with a doctor, you know to go see somebody else. Well, this is one of those times where I saw somebody, and I'm like, okay, you're not only are you telling me, in the next 5 to 10 years, you'll probably be in a wheelchair. I'm like, is there anything, to help with this, or are there any drugs on the horizon? He's like, no, not really. He just had this very cold personality, and when I left that day, I just felt really discouraged. I was in despair a bit. I'm like, this was just too much to deal with at once, because again, something I thought would happen much later on was happening much earlier. And the weakness during this time was continuing to accelerate. I lost the ability to run, and then I'd go upstairs. It'd become difficult. As I was moving, I'd be carrying a desk chair or something, and I'd have to stop halfway up. It was just continuing to decline, and I tried to kind of live in denial a bit, because I was still able to walk, I was still able to go out with friends, I was still able to somewhat live a normal life. And as long as I could hide it, that's what I wanted to do at the time. And that same doctor actually prescribed me physical therapy. And another, looking back, horrendous mistake was the physical therapist saying, oh, okay, we want to maintain muscle strength. Let's put you through this battery of exercises where we try to do that. And of course, our last presenter would probably get pretty upset at him with what they put me through in terms of, these like one-leg squats and using the calf machine and all sorts of things that definitely made things worse a lot faster. And it all culminated in September of 2010 when I had my first fall. And I know many of you in this room remember that time when that happened, and it's really just a major paradigm shift in life where your body can no longer support its own body weight. And every step I've taken since that day, it's in the back of my mind, is this going to be the step where I fall to the ground? If I fall to the ground, am I going to hurt myself? What if I'm by myself and I can't get back up? And as again, like many of you I'm sure have experienced, that was kind of the beginning of the snowball into kind of a dark period of my life that I really don't want to revisit or go back to. And I kind of call it a dark time. And I fell into kind of a funk. Again, a lot of you certainly can understand that. Maybe some of you are going through that now. And they were really kind of lost years, because I would just be angry, I'd be depressed, so many things are happening in terms of progression of disease that it was very difficult to deal with. But kind of looking back now, I realized that it needed to happen in order to get to where I am today. I needed to kind of have that experience happen to me to kind of learn how to deal with it and grow from it. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of intersperse my story with little life lessons I learned at certain periods of time. So the first lesson I learned that I didn't do a good job of doing at the time was to ask for help. And I should have done that much earlier. Again, I bottled it all up. I internalized it. I tried not to let anybody else know I had this disease, and that was probably the worst thing I could have done. It's like many of you, I'm sure, have gone through when you first ask for help. Part of you thinks that it's admitting defeat in some way. That, if I can't handle this myself, then I'm not, a good person at handling adversity altogether, or something like that. Or maybe you feel embarrassed, or you feel ashamed, as if it's almost as if it's your fault when it obviously isn't our fault. That's kind of what I was thinking, and it really was not a healthy way of thinking. And it was really when I started to ask for help, and I started, opening up about my disease to my coworkers. My family was obviously great about support the entire time, but when I really started talking to friends and telling them, I need help with certain things because I have this muscle disease, I told my coworkers, I adaptations at work. I need a different computer because the one I was carrying was too heavy, so they got me a much lighter laptop, sort of like this. That was extremely helpful. It really kind of just unburdened me from what I was dealing with. And, as humans, we're kind of social creatures, so we should be obviously communicating with other people at all times. And sometimes we think that we have to go at things alone in order to kind of prove ourselves, and that really, truly is not the case. It's really when I opened up and I started talking to other people. And what I found role models, and just searching online for other people who have gone through diseases far worse than our own, kind of see how they handled it. And in the Boston area, I can provide more information afterwards on specific people. There are a few examples of people who had life-threatening illnesses that really inspired me. One was Pete Frates, who helped start the Ice Bucket Challenge. I'm sure many of you know who he is. He has ALS. He's also a BC graduate where I went to school. And, just how he handled that in the face of, unfortunately, probably death within the next few years, that has not stopped him from living in a way that certainly has inspired me to kind of just, even when I'm having a bad day, to just be able to, I don't want to say be irrationally happy, but still to be happy despite the certain circumstances. And there's another story. His name is Sam Burns. I think he lived to be about 17. He had this disease called progeria, which is a rapidly aging disease. And HBO made a documentary about him called Life According to Sam. And again, I didn't include this in the presentation, but I'll provide it afterwards for your reference. He came off as one of the wisest people I'd ever met, and at the time, or I'd ever seen. I never actually got a chance to meet him. But in the movie, he just kept saying all these different pieces of advice and wisdom as if he was talking directly to me. Like, here's a kid who knows that he's only has a few years left to live. He looks like he's 90 years old. He has the body of a 90-year-old. Yet, he's adamant about making the marching band as a drummer. He's adamant about, I think, going to the prom and just going to parties. And that kind of mindset really had me thinking about, like, how am I looking at my own situation? How am I dealing with this? And I realized that, obviously there are different situations, but there's still a lot that I can take away from these types of people. And that was incredibly empowering and incredibly helpful to me when I needed someone the most to kind of give me the kick in the butt that I needed. And I also realized that asking for help is sort of like its own form of independence, because, somebody's helping you open a door or is helping you when you're having a bad day, just letting you vent. But knowing when to do that, knowing when you know that you need help, that's when you're able to overcome these bad days much better and much faster. And in that way, it's a form of independence that really is powerful, especially when you can frame it in that way. So this kind of really helped me to start to get back on track. I mean, I was certainly still struggling. This was about, I think, 2013 now. But at least got me thinking, what can I do to kind of get back to a life that I'm proud of living, a life that I'm looking forward to something rather than looking back at what I used to be able to do. And a couple things happened. First, I always loved to write. That's something that I just neglected for a few years, and I think that's another thing that had I done it during this period of time when I was really struggling, that would have been a lot easier on me as, again, another way to kind of vent, another therapeutic avenue, since I couldn't exercise. So I started blogging for the Muscular Dystrophy Association on their Transitions website. I started just writing about my story, just writing about my day-to-day, and in doing that, I got to meet other patients. I got to read the stories again, going back to this reading of other people's stories of what they're going through. It was a very therapeutic exercise. And it also helped to open doors for me. Again, going back to this theme of finding open doors. I got to attend the MDA conference, the clinical conference in 2014, where I met a couple of researchers who then connected me to other researchers. And next thing I know, I'm involved in fundraisers and all sorts of speaking engagements that I had never anticipated before. And I realized that this is sort of along the lines of what I wanted to do. I wanted to make an impact in some way, either helping patients or helping to advance policy in some way. And the Jain Foundation also was extremely helpful around that time. In 2013, I got to go to the scientific conference in Washington, D.C., again, to share my story, but also to meet people working on dysferlin-related research, and that was incredibly empowering for me. And all this kind of got the gears running in my head once again on what it is I really wanted to do in life. And I'd always had this dream did I want to go to business school? It's something that, even when I was back at Northeastern, is something that the professors had always talked about as kind of a logical next step. So I was a marketing major, so I was already in the kind of the business field. They recommended doing it. They said it'd be a great fun. You get to meet a lot of people who become your future network. It'll allow you to advance your career, and it'll be a great thing for your resume. And thinking back to that period of time where I wasn't handling things well, I kept pushing it off because I felt that it wasn't the right time. It wasn't the right time. How am I going to deal with that if I can't deal with my situation as it is? So at some point, I just started to really think about, is this something I can actually do? Am I thinking about it irrationally? Maybe it is something I can do, or what amount of help will I need, etc. Which kind of brings me to my second lesson of, I guess, be a dreamer. I couldn't think of a good name for this slide, so this is kind of the best default. But what I did was I really tried to think of a process, and I Googled it, just thinking about goals that might seem outside the realm of what a normal person would do. Like, what did they do in order to achieve a goal? So did they want to become an astrophysicist, or did they want to run for office, or something that would seem like a huge career achievement? What did they do to get to that goal? So what I did is I kind of just wrote out the list of all the things that made me happy, all the different goals I had for my life, and I try to remember, what it is that I really want to do before I had symptoms, to kind of rekindle those burning desires that I once had that I kind of just let die out. And I made a list, and I really just picked one or two things that I really wanted to do. And I kind of tried to remove disability from the equation, figuring I have the rest of my life to think about it. But I tried to think about, if that wasn't an issue, what would I be doing? And one of the things that kept popping up was to go to business school. And I'm like, okay, that's going to be incredibly difficult because, first of all, it's a 2-year full-time program, so you got to quit your job. I knew that it would be a tremendous amount of stress. People say that, they pull all-nighters writing papers and coming up with presentations, and they're traveling everywhere all the time, and it would just be a very difficult thing even for an able-bodied person to do. And then, what would be my budget? What would be the logistics? What kind of accommodations would I need? Could I really do this? And I kind of just backtracked and tried to figure out ways to come up with a solution where the answer to that would be yes. And in doing so, I was really able to kind of stretch my mind beyond what I initially thought was possible to an area of the future that seemed impossible and seemed like it wasn't a rational thing for me to do. I mean, some people thought I was actually crazy for doing this, myself included. And it really got me to a point where I was thinking forward instead of thinking backwards. Because at this time, again, I'm continuing to get weaker. I was falling at this point to the point where I couldn't pick myself up back on my own. And it was a very tough time for me physically, but now I'd kind of created a framework in my mind where I could actually, just think forward and just set goals beyond, what was happening to me. And my second goal here is to become an accomplished writer, which I'm working on. And that one I know is a little bit more long-term and probably won't happen overnight. I won't be winning a Pulitzer Prize anytime soon. So in 2014, I decided, what the heck, I'm just going to go forward with it because I'm not getting any stronger. I decided to apply to business school. My coworkers were very supportive of me. They knew this was something I'd wanted to do. And I decided to apply to different schools in the Boston area. And at the end of the day, I decided to go to BC. And I have to admit, it was hard. It was the hardest 2 years of my life, for sure. I know it definitely accelerated my physical decline. Just thinking about where I was, even in orientation in August 2014 to where I am today, that was probably the greatest period of loss in terms of muscle function that I've had. So it definitely took a toll on me physically. It was very stressful. I think I developed heartburn for a period of time. Thankfully, it went away, but it just showed how stressful things were. And the workload was unforgiving. So at BC, they have a quarter system where in college you normally have semesters. You take 4 classes per semester. I was taking 4 classes per quarter, so every 7 weeks was a new 4 classes. And if you haven't taken accounting in 8 years, that can be kind of a traumatic thing to have force-fed to you. And it was definitely very difficult. Which brings me to my last lesson here. Whatever you decide to do, whatever goals you decide to set, if you decide to actually pursue those goals, it's going to be tough. I mean, easy, left a long time ago. It's not coming back. I think we've all adapted in different ways to kind of our new reality. And anything you set for yourself, it's going to be just as difficult. And it's going to require a lot of support, a lot of help. But if you're wondering at any point, is a goal that you set for yourself, is it really worth doing? I just want to be somebody to definitely be encouraging to you and say that it absolutely is worth it. Just thinking about the fact that I actually got through it, and I now have an advanced degree, it's given me great confidence to pursue my other goals. I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do with my life. I probably should have answered that somewhat when I was in school, but the point is, I now feel like I can actually accomplish something because I was able to stretch my mind beyond what I thought was possible. I actually went out and I achieved it. And there's really no telling what I can do going forward. And I also want to be emphatic in the fact that, you'll hear a lot of people say, if I can do it, anybody can do it. But especially in my case, definitely what I did was nothing special. I'm not any more heroic than any one of you in this room. And I firmly believe that if there's a goal that you might have set for yourself that you kind of let go once symptoms started, or if there's a dream that you once had that you don't think is achievable, I would just, I'm not going to force you to do anything, but I'd just ask you to kind of revisit some of the things that you had thought about and to kind of see, is there a way to make it work? It may not happen exactly the way that you had anticipated it would happen, but there's definitely ways, with the support. We talked today about resources that, will help us to live and thrive and live a normal life. But there are ways, creative ways, to make that happen. So without further ado, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have, or if you want to pull me aside afterwards. This is one of my favorite quotes, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.